Hello, everybody. Welcome to Freestyle Talks. This is Carlos Osvaldo from Mozambique, Maputo, the capital of Mozambique. We are on a Friday, October 9th here. It's a lovely sunny day in Mozambique, and we are going to a weekend. So it's a late afternoon, 6 p.m. Today, we will be talking to a special guest who's in a different time zone. He's back in US, so I think it's 12 noon, back at his time zone. And I'm very curious to have this conversation with my guest Fredrick, because as I was telling him that as Africans ourselves, we learn a lot about our culture, Black culture, I mean, through movies and through music and through the pop culture. And most of our influence are often American. And I have an impression that what we often see is not the real thing. It's not the full picture. It's not the full spectrum. And I want to learn from people who are doing this work of getting into the bottom of the questions, going into the roots, going deeper into what's there, who paved the way for us to be here, who were the names we have to know, uh, how is the current situation of Black America, and as United States are approaching elections, how is Black America dealing, and the racial tension we often hear about Black America. So I think it's also fascinating. And our guest is also a mental therapist. So I think there's also a very interesting link with the mental health aspect and the history of Black America. So I'm really very curious to learn and to really talk with our guest. So with no further ado, let me introduce our guest of this afternoon, Fredrick. I'm gonna call him to the screen. There you are.
Hey,
Welcome.
how you doing, man? I'm doing good.
I'm good in Mozambique. Let me greet you also in Portuguese. Olá.
Hola.
So this is our hi. Yeah, it's similar to Spanish.
Okay.
In Spanish is hola. So Frederick, welcome to Freestyle Talks, and thank you very much for being here and for accepting our invitation.
Sure, no problem, brother. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I think it's very special, this possibility of having the internet to connect us from US to Mozambique to talk about Black history, to talk about our history, our bonds, our roots. Um, but first, I would like to talk about you. For people who don't know, who is Frederick D. Murphy? Who are you? What do you do? Tell us briefly about you and your work.
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Frederick Murphy. I was raised in the South, here in the United States of America. So Tennessee, lived in Tennessee, North Carolina, Georgia, spent time in Louisiana, and these are states that are here in the United States of America. Um, I'm also a mental health therapist. It's what I went to school for. But history is my passion. There's something that is special about delving deeply into what makes the person who's standing in front of the mirror who they are. And the only way that you're able to do that is if you look back. It doesn't mean that you have to stay there. However, you have to look back in order to have a comprehensive understanding of who you are and who your other brothers and sisters are that are walking amongst us, right? Work in various different fields with counseling. I work with young adults. I work with different companies here in the United States. I live in the city of Charlotte, North Carolina. So I am a EAP, which is an employee assistance program counselor for their employees at the city as well as the county. And then I'm a filmmaker. That is what has kind of fueled my passion even more to delve into various different types of histories. And that's how I created History Before Us. So it was a situation to where, because being a therapist and working in the human services field, it's you can get burnt out, and you have to supplement that type of gratification with other things. And what I did to supplement that type of gratification was to create History Before Us, which allows me to create a platform for individuals who have been marginalized, oppressed, and resilient to be able to share their stories. And I've been blessed to be able to do that.
And these stories, they are not heard enough in America.
Mhm. Yeah, they're not. They're not. I specifically want individuals that aren't necessarily in the history books, like not your Martin Luther Kings, not your Malcolm X's, not your Harriet Tubmans, those individuals, not your Rosa Lee Parks. I mean, we all know those individuals, and they're known mostly globally. However, there's so many individuals who spawned from Rosa Parks, from Nat Turner, Harriet Tubman, um, William Steele, all these individuals who've done great things as far as abolitionist work, as far as civil rights movement works, as far as the Black Lives Matters movement. And we need to also recognize those individuals as well. It's because everyone has a hero in their own community. Everyone has a hero in their organization. And those individuals need to be highlighted as well, because their influence is just as important as anyone else that has a big name, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And tell me something, Frederick, going back to your early years, maybe childhood or teenage years,
Mm-hmm.
and were you always curious or fascinated about history, or that came later on?
No, it came really early. I was blessed to know my grandmother, my great grandmother, and my great great grandmother. So there's a lot of different generations. I was very young when my great great grandmother passed, but her funeral was the very first funeral I attended. And my great grandmother had 14 kids. So my grandmother who's still alive, she has 9 siblings that are living. So it's a lot of them that are still living, right? Actually, I'm sorry, 8 of them. No, it's 9 that are still living. So we were always very strongly connected in the town that I grew up in, with family reunions, Thanksgiving, different types of holidays. We would all get together, and I would always be that kid that would kind of eavesdrop and listen to the older adults, when they're telling all the kids to go outside and play, right? Because this is adult stuff. Like, this is grown up business, right? That's what they usually say. But I was one of those kids that always I was very intuitive. So I like to listen. I like to gather information, because I'm hearing things such as sharecropping. I didn't know what sharecropping was, but I'm taking mental note of it. And, talking about the institution of slavery, talking about the migration from the South up to the Midwest here in the United States, which is cities like Chicago, Milwaukee, all these other cities in the Midwest, because people were leaving the South for industry up there, manufacturers and things like that. Because in the South, they were still sharecropping, which was just another form of slavery. You were getting taken advantage of. You owed the people who you were working for at the end of the year. So it was just another form of slavery to a certain extent. So I was able to galvanize all these different stories as a young adult and as a young kid, and keep that with me throughout the remainder of my life. And what really, really did it was I walked into one of my great aunt's house, and I saw a picture of what seemed to be a black male and a white lady. And this was in the late 1800s. It was a charcoal picture. And I asked my family members, a couple of them, who they were, and the only thing they had were names. They didn't know anything outside of names. So I took it upon myself to do some very, very extensive research to find out who those individuals were, and they were our enslaved grandparents who came, who ultimately had Amos is his name. He had roughly 20 kids. 6 of them were during the institution of slavery, so he most likely was bred. And then his wife, Isabella, was actually European and Native American.
Mm-hmm. And what about school? In the school, did the history you learned while growing up, how was the black part or the black chapters of our history told in the school as you were growing up?
It's very one-sided. You get the quote unquote good Negroes, if you will. You'll get a Rosa Parks or you'll get Malcolm X, but you didn't really go no further than that. Like it's very whitewashed. I fortunately enough in my middle school went to a school that was predominantly black. It was called Greenwood Middle School. So we had black teachers, mostly black teachers and everything else. And the principal of the school was one of my cousins. So you would see banners for HBCU colleges and things like that in the hallway and stuff like that. So that felt really good. But elementary school and high school, there were no elements deeply rooted in African American or African history or Latin history, none of those things. So you literally had to take it upon yourself to go find it for yourself. Again, we stayed with the Martin Luther King and we briefly touched on Malcolm X, not a lot at all, because Malcolm X was deemed a radical for these individuals. So you definitely don't want to preach that, right? You don't want to empower yourself, right? You want to keep everyone good, right? It really took individuals doing their own self-research in order for you to be able to have a comprehensive understanding of what our history was. And I went to 2 HBCUs. I graduated from Tennessee State University, which is an HBCU in Nashville, Tennessee. And I also graduated from Bethune-Cookman, which is an HBCU down in Florida. So I got some of that history being in those places, but it needed to be instilled in elementary school all the way throughout K through 12 in order for us to have a good understanding. And it needs to be real history. It doesn't need to be the fluff, right? So from my experience through school, it wasn't enough. Did not learn much about the continent of Africa. Did not learn about the transatlantic slave trade, any of that stuff. It was that's all. And I'm still doing it today. I'm still doing it today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And later on, as you were growing up, you decided to actually go and study on mental health. Why was that? What made you go into that route instead of maybe history as a way to continue studying? And how did you kept history while studying mental health? How did history went into the background or was always there present in your life?
Yeah, so my mother was a nurse. Almost everyone in my family are in the helping profession in some way, shape, or form. I'm a people person. I want to see people win, right? I specifically marginalized people that may not have the access that other individuals have. I want to see people evolve. And oftentimes the things that were put in place in communities, cities, states, et cetera, they were not, they weren't enough, if you will. So I figured, being an African-American male, I can utilize my position as that, which there are not very many African-American male therapists that are licensed here in this city, nor other places. The amount of women far surpass the amount of men of African descent that are licensed therapists. So I figured that I can utilize that status, if you will, to be influential in individuals' lives. I'm a person that grew up, we were living well below the poverty line. There was at one point in time, we were without lights for 3 months, no electricity. So we're using a kerosene heater to heat water and, eating cold cut sandwiches daily, wrapping up in as much clothes as possible. So
Mm.
I know that I knew that going forward in the future, there were going to be other kids that were like me, and I wanted to be able to help them. So I did that. But throughout that process, it also helped me look at the different type of challenges that Black folks had to experience and how traumatic that could be. And because that had to be traumatic, we needed to be in a space to where we were open enough to be able to discuss and talk about these things without being criticized. And most likely, a person would open up more to a person that looked like them versus a person that didn't. So that's kind of what catapulted me in getting into the helping profession and the human services profession. It came from a sense of empathy and a place of passion to make sure that we, as brothers and sisters, were going to be okay. I'm my brother's keeper and I'm my sister's keeper. I have to be, but I had to have a certain experience in life for me to understand that. And as far as the history piece, we're talking about trauma. We're talking about historical trauma that's lodged deeply in our DNA. And it's not just in mine, but it's in yours as well, right? It's in a lot of individuals that are people of color. When we talk about the institution of slavery, whether it was individuals that were sold by other Africans or individuals that were stolen by Europeans, that is a
Mm.
very traumatic thing. So think about it. When you are taken from a place that's your homeland and you're put on a ship and you may be on there for months, you may be on there for weeks. Um, you're laying next to individuals who have, you're laying next to feces, you're laying next to urine, you're laying next to blood, with women that were on their cycle during the time. You're hearing babies crying, you're hearing grown people crying, you're laying next to dead people. Um, you may not have ever been on the water before. So you're on a ship, right? In very tight quarters. It's very moldy. There's rats, there's mosquitoes, there are all these different elements, and you have no control except to sit as still as possible because you're enslaved. And imagine getting off of that ship and you're in a brand new land, right? Whether it was through the Caribbean, whether it's Brazil, whether it's Portugal, all these different places, right? And you're in this new land, there's no way in the world that your DNA was not altered through that process.
Mm.
No way, right?
Mm.
So
Mm.
that was something that after I started researching it more and I started looking at the various different mental health challenges that people of color were having, I'm like, I started researching, and through epigenetics, I said, well, this is directly related to how individuals were treated during that time period and how people are treated now. So what you're seeing now is just it's a flare up of those different historical traumas that may have been suppressed in people mentally and emotionally and spiritually, and now it's starting to rise up because of everything that's coming out. And that's not only here in the U.S. That's across the globe, to where the institution
Mm.
of slavery was present. So
Mm.
I found a way to merge my two passions together. So with the very first documentary, The Other Side, The American South as We Know It, I created a presentation titled Utilizing Film to Better Understand Historical Trauma in the African American Community. So I show the film, which is comprised of me traveling throughout the southeastern part of the United States, interviewing individuals about their specified experiences during Jim Crow. And for those that may not know, but Jim Crow was a set of laws, it was a behavior, it was policies that occurred in the United States of America that kept Africans or people of African descent, native descent, et cetera, from being able to achieve the same advantages that whites were.
Mhm.
It often came with lynching, it came with different types of discriminations, et cetera, et cetera. So I was able to create a presentation that spoke to that and how we still carry that with us today. And the likelihood of that going anywhere will be very slim if equitable things aren't started immediately. Because you have to think about it. We have about 4 or 5 generations that are represented on this continent within itself. So if equity started today fully across the board, you got to think all those generations have to die out before you're able to actually even see the progress of it,
Mm.
on a full scale, right? So that's kind of how I married the two together and kept them relevant.
Mhm. I want to go back to something you said about the your role as a black male,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because it's one topic that really interests me. Also, because I I work on female economic empowerment. I told you that before we started our live, and also in previous conversations here at Freestyle Talks, we we also spoke about the lack of a father figure in many of our African communities or black communities, also in the United States. That uh, most of us, or a big part of us as children, grew up without knowing our parents, our fathers, and being raised by women, by our mothers or grandmothers.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, our grown men often had two or three families, often had 20 kids in three separate houses or families, and also that has a huge impact on how uh, we grow up and the type of men we become, and how we interact with women, how we even raise our own families. So, what have you learned from that experience and that role of a black man? Uh, how do you see it between our generation? I think we have a similar age and the
Mm-hmm.
previous ones.
Yeah. So the thing is, like, if we look at things from a comprehensive standpoint throughout the timelines, on most southern plantations here in the United States of America, they intentionally made sure that these families weren't necessarily together. So I've read various different texts to where, and I'm gonna start with institutional slavery, that the father may be allowed on a Sunday to come down and visit his kids, but it wasn't something that was on a continuum to where it created or looked like a family unit, right? So psychologically, even at that point, you're already putting this type of disposition in individuals' cultures, in their DNA, in just their own holistic health that states that this is not supposed to be. Right. So we're looking at things from that standpoint in the separation of families throughout the institution of slavery. You may wake up one second and have your father there, and the next thing you know, he's sold further south to Mississippi, and you may be in Kentucky, and these are states, right? So there has always been this element of separating black families to a certain degree. Even during, right now we have mass incarceration to where brothers and sisters, as well as our Latin and Hispanic brothers and sisters, are affected immensely by this. And it's mostly the males that are being locked up. So if you don't have a male in order to be present because they're locked up, because they got a petty charge, or they may not have even done anything at all, which we're seeing is happening a lot, that's ending in death, unfortunately, then that affects the family structure. Here in the United States of America, with government housing, they have in certain instances in where, if the father is not married to the mother, that they can't cohabitate in these homes. So the male would have to leave the home, or the mother would be at risk of losing, and the kids, shelter in general. So those things are very, they permeate in our culture, in our society, and it doesn't necessarily speak to wanting these units to be connected. Now, there is also, of course, personal responsibility that goes along with that as well. We understand that. I'm not giving anyone a pass because I was a product of that. But I will say, before I get into that, I will say that I don't know too many of my friends in particular who aren't in their children's lives. There was a study that came out not too long ago, and it compared the lives of Black African Americans versus whites, and who's in their children's lives, and it's synonymous. They were neck and neck. What has happened is the negative propaganda across the globe with regards to what Black folks do in their communities and what they've done in their communities has thrown this mask out there that Black men don't take care of their children, or not involved in their lives, or don't want to be involved in their lives. So that has negatively hindered our culture in a large amount, in a large way. However, yes, you do in every culture have bad apples to where people are just not involved. And that has detrimental effects on our children. Again, the sense of feeling abandoned. Okay, we've seen that before. That's also lodged in our DNA because of the various different instances from a historical standpoint that has happened in our lives. So then there's isolation that comes with that. There's depression. There's possible substance abuse. There's oppositional behavior to where you're trying to figure out how to be the best person that you can be. But because you don't have this other person here and you see your mother struggling, then you start to act out and you start to do things in an unsavory way as your way of expressing. And all it is displaced anger. It's not something that a lot of people want to do. However, it is something that, unfortunately, if those are the only things if that's the only skill that you feel like you have because you don't have a developed context of life, then that's what it is that you do. So it has a profound effect on us. There is a historical component to that. And then there's some self-responsibility to that as well. But I think that ultimately, from what I see, that more Black fathers are involved in their lives now than what I've ever seen before. And you know, when you talk about previous generations, there was a lot of different obstacles that were in the way. But here in the United States, from what I've seen, if you had a father and you had a family, they had a sharecrop, they're a family unit because guess what? Everyone has to get out there and work. My grandmother was a sharecropper. All her siblings were sharecroppers because their father was a sharecropper. And you have kids to work. So you got to be together. So yeah, it can be very complex, but there's a lot of different components to it. But I will say that propaganda that has been spewed throughout multiple different countries as it relates to brown and Black folks and parenting, it has had a profound negative effect with regards to how people perceive us.
Mm-hmm. We have one question here. Let me share with you. So it's linked to this aspect of the presence of black fathers in their children's lives, and sometimes, and as you said, that the evolution has been positive. So it's getting better at each generation, and I have to tell you that also in Mozambique, I can see the same evolution. So I'm really happy to share that with you, and we are going in the right direction. But we sometimes see that the families where parents, when fathers as a children didn't have their own fathers around, sometimes when they grow up and became adults and fathers, they do the same thing to their kids. And the question Bruno is raising is really that it shouldn't be the opposite. So people shouldn't be trying to compensate or correct the mistakes their fathers did, or it's also on the DNA and it's a natural instinct.
You know, to answer her question, and thank you for the question, because I'm a product of that. My father's father died when he was 2 years old, I believe, and my father was, absent a lot, a whole lot. But I have 3 kids, and like she has mentioned, if they grew up that way, shouldn't they know different? And at this point, because of evolution and because of the resources, because of a better outlook on life and more education, I am immensely involved in my kids' lives, like every day. They live with me. I'm married. We're together. We do everything together. Excuse me. Family vacations, hiking, reading, school, all these things. So you would hope from a humanity standpoint that people learn lessons from previous generations, but the problem with it is it's so individualized. You know, you wish that you could control the outcomes of how individuals show up in the world, but because it's so individualized, it makes it very difficult. But one thing that people cannot say that they don't have access to are references that show that there is something that can be done differently than what it is that they've done and how they've presented themselves within their family structure. There are multiple different opportunities for individuals to to talk with the elders, to talk with professionals, but I think sometimes ego gets in the way. And when ego gets in the way, and when an individual has been allowed to do certain things, whether they were pacified by mothers or if they were with women that may have been passive aggressive and you know kind of allowed them to come in and out of their children's lives at no fault of the women's own, because they're just wanting to make sure that I would hope that their children know who their father is, and things like that. But that's what makes it tough because it's so individualized. Like if you look at things from the perspective of how things were should have been in my family, I shouldn't be in my kids' lives because my father wasn't in mine. However, I had to learn, I had to research, I had to go back and look at things from a historical perspective. I have to look at things how I want things to go forward. I want my daughters to be empowered, and I want any woman who has been in a situation to where a male did walk out on in their lives, that they grow to be empowered for themselves, to where when the next time comes around, which you know, hopefully that is the case, so we can keep making beautiful brown and black babies, that you know, that person will be good for them. So I think that it's because I don't want to throw a blanket on black folks across the globe, because that's unfortunately what happens, is that one black person is a spokesman for everybody, and specifically here in the U.S. So, but yeah, her question is very valid with regards to why people don't learn going forward. And sister, if I had $1 million for that, I would be able to answer it in a way that would make sense, or that would curb some of those statistics. Then I'd be a very rich man if I had the answer to it. But I do feel like it's a lot of individual choice.
Yeah, and that's also the self empowerment of each individual, being accountable for your own actions and your own life. So the excuse that my parents did this, or my family was like this, or it was always this way, I think it's no longer valid. We have the access to a range of information like no other generation before us. So our generation clearly knows what's wrong and what's right. And if we are messing up or doing stupid things, is because we want and not because we don't know better.
Yeah, and some of
That's my opinion. Yeah.
right, and some of that, and yeah, I do share some of those same sentiments. And the only place in where I differ is that if a person chooses to not utilizes the resources to heal from some of those things, such as counseling, such as religious organizations and institutions that are open for individuals to discuss and talk about those things. You know, if you don't join any groups of that have the lights of empowering each other and supporting each other, then those are things that you're going to miss out on, because you don't have to be out here on an island. You know, you literally can create your own tribe of individuals who've had the same circumstances that have allowed each other to self heal themselves and heal collectively. But again, I think that a lot of times our egos get in the way, specifically as Black folks, because of the simple fact that we're just expected to function at an optimum level regardless of what's happening in our lives, right? The empathy for us is not the same as it is for other people. So that's what sometimes make things more difficult. So yeah.
Mm. No, I totally get that. Uh, Let me shift also to a different topic. You also mentioned about the experience, and you took us briefly into that scary experience of being in a slave ship.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a very powerful conversation before with Hotep Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And Hotep Jesus was questioning the version of slavery we were told.
Mm-hmm.
He was is very skeptical about that, and he's very critical of the common narrative and the history we were told.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and some of the things he's saying is that it doesn't make sense from a business perspective. So if you were a slave master,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't make sense to rely that your main product is lying hundreds of miles away in a different country and having to go from ship all the way to Africa, months of trip with a lot of losses. So what his theory is and his version is, and what is challenging is telling us that black people were already in America.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the slaves were not brought from Africa, but were people who were already in America, who were already in Caribbean. And as an historian, because he left us with a lot of doubts, a lot of questions, and having you as an historian, I cannot help myself to ask you about what do you know and what's the real truth about slavery.
Yeah, and there's so many different versions of what that looks like, right? And and I respect everything that brother says because everybody has their own interpretation of what it is. And he's absolutely right. We were here before Christopher Columbus. We were here before 1619. There were individuals that were Spaniards that said when they came upon the shores that they were black people that were already here, specifically in places like Fort Caroline, Florida. Menendez and a couple of other those Spanish explorers who had black folks that were also on those vessels stated that they were black folks that were already here. um, so yeah, that this premise that we got here in 1619, I think that what makes that from a definition standpoint of our first introduction here to this country was that the first documented enslaved came in 1619. But he's absolutely right. We were here before then. The thing is, for me, is that these insurance companies here in the United States of America have documented evidence that when brothers and sisters were brought over here from those vessels, whether they came from the Caribbean or whether they came from Africa, were utilized as currency, as losses, in order for them to receive payment once they came upon the shores. You know for a fact that greed is something that drives people. So I have no doubt in my mind that some of the individuals that were brought over here, who may have been captured, who may have been sold, who may have been stolen, were they overcompensated for those individuals by getting more and intentionally throwing them over because it's a paycheck at the end of the day once you get to the other side. Like some of the big insurance companies and banks here in these United States United States insured enslaved individuals, and they counted them as losses for these English and these Spaniards who were bringing these enslaved over here. And it's documented, right? From way back then. So well, I definitely respect, and his version could be true. The thing is, there's so many different doctrines that are out there that it's difficult to decipher what's real and what's not. For me, I do believe that brothers and sisters came throughout the diaspora via these various different modalities, but I also strongly believe and have researched to where we were here in this country before then. Because my question is always, to a certain extent, when did the tide turn? To where if we were occupying the space beforehand, were we that defenseless to where we allowed them to take over? If we were already here in abundance, right? I do know that there were small populations of us here, but how does that happen to where if we were here first, which we were, but how does it happen that we allowed Europeans and Spaniards come in to rule to where we submit to them?
Mm. Mm.
And I still have yet to
Yeah.
figure out or anyone to give me that answer to why we would have been so submissive to just become enslaved individuals. Because the thing is, there are documented slave revolts uh, early 1600s there in the Virginias, the colonies, and all the way up until the end of all the way up until the emancipation of slavery. So none of these people people just didn't lay down and say, I want to be enslaved, right? Like, yeah, I'm volunteering, take me, right? Like, it wasn't the case. These individuals always fought. They always fought, always fought. So for me, knowing that these different revolts did happen, when was that point in time in which some of them said, well, let me just submit and be enslaved. Like, that's what I want for my life and my future. And then we also have to recognize that the institution of chattel slavery was implemented here. And the institution of chattel slavery, which pretty much meant it would be forever, right? You were born enslaved, and that person, your children would be born enslaved, et cetera, versus indentured servitude, in which when the Irish came over here, and some of the very first 20 odd Negroes that they say were on, that came here were, for the Irish, it was their indentured servitude. Their indentured servitude was to allow them the ability to become citizens of the U.S. And we didn't get that same opportunity, right? So a lot of different theories out there, a lot of different hypotheses. I respect and I look at them all, and I try to glean various different things from a lot of these different places, and try to conceptualize it and make it fit for where I'm at that moment.
Yeah, truth is in the middle often.
Yeah.
It's is not just one version. I think it's in the a little bit of everything we hear. I heard about a couple of fascinating stories about how they took over.
Yeah.
Let me share a couple of them with you briefly. So one of them is about a Columbus. I heard a story about he stopped his boat on an island because it was lacking resources, foods, and so on to go back to Spain. So he and his crew stopped, and they really interacted really well with the local tribe who was living there, and they asked them to give them the resources they needed to go back to Spain. And that tribe at that time had a really rigid system of production where they only produced what they needed for that season. And it was very well counted and measured. And they said, no, we cannot spare. It's what we need, and the cold season is coming, so winter is coming, so we definitely need this, and we cannot help you with that. And apparently, Columbus, who had astrophysics, someone who reads the stars, how do you call it?
Yeah.
Astronomers. Yeah. So he had one of those people on his tripulation, on his crew, because it's useful and helpful to navigation. And they knew an eclipse was coming soon, was approaching. So then he said, apparently, my God is ordering you to give me the food I need to my crew. Otherwise, he will punish you, and and the sky will turn black as a sign of a warning of my God to your God and to your crew. And they laughed at him like, "Oh, come on, just hang around. We are getting along, but we cannot help you with that. Yeah, but you are welcome to stay with us for a while. And, indeed, one day the sky really turned black. In the middle of the day, an eclipse happened, and they all bounded to him like, oh my God, it's his God. And they gave him the food he needed. And he actually took over. So he left a part of his crew there to become masters of that tribe. And other stories I heard are that as the tribes they were fighting amongst each other, the Spanish and Portuguese used to choose one side to partner with and to support, and they would help them to annihilate the other side, and then they would turn and also kill the first partners or supporters. So some of the tactics I heard about this, but
It
it's a
is
long story, of course.
others that say that he never even came to the United States. I mean, there's
Mm,
the guy's a fraud. I mean, in the
yeah.
United States, a lot of different states, like we just had the governor here in North Carolina announce on yesterday, I believe it was yesterday or a day before, that what was normally Christopher Columbus Day is now Indigenous Day. So, people are opening up and recognizing that it was a lie. A lot of it was a lie. And it all came from the space of greed, of supremacy, and wanting to rule others, right?
Mhm.
But that's how it works. That's what it's rooted in. It's rooted in taking advantage of individuals that are showing a sense of humanity for the sake of humanity and taking full advantage. Even in Jamaica, there's a statue of Christopher Columbus that's up.
Mm,
So
yeah.
um, yeah, good old Christopher Columbus.
Yeah, man. And let's go to today,
Yeah.
jump a few centuries. And our things today, as we see a lot of Black Lives Matter movement, uh, very well alive
Hmm.
with the George Floyd cases and Breonna Taylor. So a lot of things happening, unfortunately, in the US and the upcoming elections. How do you see these moments of Black history in the United States and in the scenario of these elections and the importance of these elections to shift maybe and or to improve our condition as Black people in the US?
Well, you hope that they do. You hope that the information that people are seeing on TV, you hope that the things that they may have read in history books that are that resemble what we're experiencing now would be enough for individuals to kind of wake up and say, okay, listen, we're stronger together. But unfortunately, that's not the case. These instances in which Black bodies are not being considered with regards to the preservation of life is nothing new. This is age old, right? This isn't something that is a novelty to the world or just us here in the United States. These things have happened for centuries across various different spaces. Um, whether it's the islands, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in all these different spaces, Black bodies have never been giving the respect that other bodies have. And we're just seeing it in a different form today because of the surveillance that we are able to obtain with regards to the cameras. Lynching never really stopped in this country. The different experiments that were happening on Black and brown bodies, they never stopped. Indigenous folks and indigenous can be two different ways in this country. I tend to believe that indigenous is Black and Native, is African and Native, if you will. Um, um, their bodies were being utilized for the medical students at these prestigious colleges here, heads being scalped. They would study our brains with the women. They were going in and messing with their reproductive system without giving them any type of anesthesia to curb the pain. Like so because we've been living in a country that has never valued the life of Black bodies, it just continues and it permeates throughout our society. And what we're seeing now, which is very unfortunate, and again, not to just focus on George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, but there have been numerous people way before him. You know, we have a lynching memorial museum that's here, that's in Montgomery, Alabama, the same place that the bus boycotts have started, and hundreds of bodies that were lynched during a time span in the United States of America. And those are just the ones that are reported, right? Lynchings doesn't necessarily only mean someone being hanged by a tree. George Floyd was lynched. Breonna Taylor was lynched, right? So right now, there's so much tension that's happening in the country, not only because of the president that we have, who won't denounce that white supremacy is something that has happened or systemic racism, but he has his own agenda. He also is an individual that put a bounty on the head of the Central Park Five. Like literally in the newspaper, a full-blown ad putting a bounty on.
I remember that.
Yeah. Father was a KKK member. And the thing is, they've only been here for like 2 or 3 generations. So when you talk about individuals, you know, you talk about these different policies for immigrants and things like that. I mean, dude, you're one of them, right? And that's not a bad thing. It's just your agenda and the way that you verbalize things and the way that you use your power onto other individuals is to weaponize these different things. And Black folks, unfortunately, are part of that whole regime. It's a very tough place to be right now here in America because you don't know what's going to happen. We have all of these different neo-Nazi groups, all these white supremacist groups that are going around saying that if Trump doesn't win, then it's going to be a civil war and all these other things. And we know the history repeats itself. So we're bound for one anyway. And I think that unfortunately there will be a lot of more uprisings if this man is elected as president again, if he cheats his way again. And it's something that we have to be prepared for. And it's something that just from a worldwide standpoint, the dictatorship that happens in this country, and not only this country, but other countries, people eventually are going to stop going for it. I feel that as our payment to Mother Earth, that the Creator has allowed us to be on, that we owe it to be good humans to each other. And right now we're not living up to that for Mother Earth. We're disrespecting her, which allows us the opportunity to create sustenance, to live, to breathe, and all these different things. And we have to do a better job of it. But right now, racial tensions in this country is super duper high. Individuals that I speak with from an oral history standpoint say for themselves, this is resemblance to a certain degree of what it is that they experienced back then, as far as racial. Yeah.
The narrative I get from very far distance is that African communities don't vote often. Is this true? Is this a reality you see? Because I hear a lot of effort to encourage people, go vote, your vote counts, especially aimed to Black communities. Is this also a propaganda, or is this a true situation?
I think I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. We've had a Black mayor ever since I lived here. I've been here for 10 years. I lived in Atlanta, Georgia for 8 years. We had Black mayors for 8 years, Black police chiefs, Black fire chiefs. Here in Charlotte, our sheriff is Black. Our police chief is Black. Our, I don't know about the fireman, fire chief. I don't know if he is or not. Our community, our city council is like 80% Black. Who's putting those in position? Black folks. You don't live in a predominantly white city and then have white folks putting Black folks at the head. So I think that it's just like therapy to a certain extent. A lot of folks say that Black folks don't go see counselors. Black folks, it's taboo to do X, Y, and Z. Well, I've been counseling since 2004, and the majority of the individuals that I see are Black, right? So I do think that there's some negative propaganda that's put in that. When I go to the polls here, I see a lot of Black folks waiting in line. That's just what I see. Um, so I think that sometimes Black folks have always been the scapegoat to when things go wrong. You're always the scapegoat. You're not raising your kids. You're not voting. You don't work. You don't do this. You don't do that. Well, how are in these majority Black cities, the police chiefs, the mayors, et cetera, how are they getting voted in? I don't see a lot of white folks running to vote Black people in. Where would be the advantage for them to do such? You know? So my
I
personal,
get that.
yeah. So in my personal opinion, I think that a lot of Black folks vote. I think that the reason why it's so pronounced now that individuals are strongly encouraging individuals to vote more so now than ever before is because of the outcome that can possibly happen in this country and across the world with regards to foreign relations if we have Donald Trump for another number of years.
Okay. And let's talk about Obama because Obama is now a part of history, and we can look at him with some distance now and really make a more clear mind analysis. And when Obama was elected the first time, we felt here in Mozambique a sense of change, a sense of hope, like never before. Watching a person of color, a man of color being elected president of US, we also felt a wave of change coming. But a few years went by, and I kind of have an impression our expectations were too high, and it never really changed as much as we felt. And do you share this idea? And do you think, and if you share, do you think it was our fault of having too big expectations, or he underachieved in any way? What's your balance of these two terms?
I was very happy that he won. I thought from an opportunity of the ability to say that I can accomplish and do anything. Not that it was never there as being a Black person, but that had always been there. But that kind of, it made it valid, right? Because you had somebody that was in charge at the highest position here in this country. In the United States, with politics, there's so many different tiers that you have to go through in order for you to get certain things passed and things like that. So you have the Senate, you have the Congress, you have the House. There's all these different layers that you have to go through in order to get certain initiatives passed. Now, with President Obama, there had been a lot of pushback, of course, which, anyone could see that initially. The Republicans stated, emphatically that they're not going to work with him at all. And they kept true to that promise. Certain things that he tried to get passed, they would shoot down instantly. And he didn't necessarily flex his executive muscle to pass certain things. But for me, I'm gonna be honest with you, with anybody who's been in that seat, I haven't seen much change in the things that I have to do. Everything has just always kind of been the same. I think that he did do a good job from a standpoint of trying to be more inclusive as possible with some of the things that he did get to pass. The LGBTQ population in this country, I know, had benefited greatly from his tenure in, which honed in on his ideology of being more inclusive. And I know that some Black folks feel slighted because they thought that just because we had a Black man in office, that everything would change and shift to where things would be intentionally more beneficial for us. which I was hoping as well, which I know that that's what it is that we need in order for us to gain equal footing. Do I feel that the candidates that we have today are going to provide that? I don't. Um, but that's why it's important for us to go back to the 10s, the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s when we were more established in our neighborhoods. From an economic standpoint, the black dollar stayed within our own neighborhood before it got out multiple times. From a business standpoint, we had our own school standpoint, we had our own, but when integration occurred, it diluted everything. It made you congregate with people who didn't want you to be there, who ultimately took advantage of you, whether it was loans, whether it was school zones, whether it was taking your spouse and raping them. Literally, these black women were going into the homes of white folks, taking care of their children and taking care of the houses. Men were raping them. And I've interviewed individuals whose grandparents or parents were unfortunately under that veil. So because there's just so many different channels here in the United States of hierarchy with regards to your social status and what the autonomy that people in certain places in the government have, just because you reach that high position as president, it does not mean that you're going to be able um, to solve the challenges within certain groups, unless the House, the Senate, et cetera, is majority of what it is that you are, and they aren't majority black. So you can't think that that agenda is going to be the same. Even though President Obama was a president, there were still people that were in those different areas that may have been Democrats that wasn't rocking with some of the decisions he decided because they weren't black. They don't understand the culture. They don't understand the history in which why we need those things to happen in order for us to get equal footing in this country.
So it's not just about electing a black president and we have a instant change. It's about the whole system, and the entire chain has to be more diverse.
Yes.
I get that.
Supreme Court doesn't have any black. I mean, you have Thomas. He's been on there forever, but his ideologies, I mean, it's completely against what we need to be progressive. So, and that's the Supreme Court. Clarence Thomas. Yeah.
And Bruna is sending us another question about the schools, as you said, about we had schools, separated schools from black people and for white people. What do you think about that system, segregation, separated schools? Was it better back then? You think it's better now? What's your position?
I definitely think, and thank you for the question, I definitely think that from what I hear by folks, that back then it was better, because you had individuals that truly cared about you. You had a sense of safety in those communities because you knew that the Klan wasn't going to, well, you knew that it would be more unlikely for the Klan to be able to just come in and do whatever it is they wanted. I think about communities like Mound Bayou, Mississippi, down in the Delta, who had black folks armed to the teeth with guns, utensils, farming tools, everything you can name of, knives, that wouldn't allow black folks to come into their communities to burn down their schools or their businesses and things like that. So back then there was a stronger sense of community. There was a stronger sense of sharing. There was a stronger sense of responsibility for each other. And education was the pinnacle of a lot of that. So yes, I think that back then it definitely was better. However, the thing is, when there's no equity that's given, when the resources are not shared equally, then that's always going to create a challenge. I can even think in my middle school, we were always like an addition behind what the white school had in my middle school. Like I mentioned earlier, my middle school was more African American than it was mixed. And the other school, which was called Richview, operative word, rich. They always had the most up-to-date things. When we talk about our HBCUs, look at the lack of facilities that we have that some of these other schools don't. And that's even the state schools. I went to Tennessee State University, and there's other state schools that are far more advanced than Tennessee State University. Why? I personally believe it's because it's an HBCU, and there's not as much thought that was given. Right now in this country, we have so many charter schools and private schools that are popping up, even in African American neighborhoods that are being gentrified. It's ridiculous. So it's causing another gap with regards to learning opportunities, because in this specific state and others as well, the money is allocated to education goes to the zip codes. If you're in a higher zip code bracket from a financial standpoint, then that's where more money is going to go. So the whole system is screwed up, and it does not function in the spirit in inclusivity with regards to giving individuals a chance. Now, you see a lot of brothers and sisters that are starting to homeschool their children. They're starting to open up their own charter schools that are doing the best that they can to make sure that their children are prepared for the future. And I hope that that's something that continues. But right now, we are going backwards. Here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I live, 3 years ago, we were the most segregated school system in the state of North Carolina. We have over 1 million people in the metro area. How does that happen? Right? So, yes, I do believe that back then, people valued their education a little bit more because they knew that their teachers were going to be Black. They knew that their teachers were going to care about them. They knew that their teachers were going to give them lessons beyond the school books. And now we're having to depend on these school systems to educate our children and prepare them in the future with individuals that may not be as qualified as other individuals because they don't want to work in these school systems. So yeah, so to your question, it's a lot of divisiveness in that right now, but it was back then as well.
Cool. And do you see that? Yeah, let me tell you from an historic perspective. Do you see that happening again sometime soon, or not possible?
You mean it? You got to have a capital. You got to have capital. You got to have land. If you don't have your neighborhoods, because gentrification is happening so rapidly, where do you put the school? Places that used to house these schools, these Rosenwald schools, and these these colored schools, all these different places. Now a lot of these different schools and where they sit are on land that's it costs so much now that you can't even afford it. If your job aren't paying you the amount of money that you need in order to be able to create these different opportunities, then how do you do such? And this is along from the masses standpoint, not in individual pockets to where these things are actually happening, but this is from a macro community standpoint. So I don't see it going back to that point because of the simple fact that you don't have the resources to foster those type of opportunities for a lot of folks.
Cool. So Bruna is sending us also another 2 questions. So Bruna is raising one question here about if that system was still in practice, the lack of knowledge and interaction with the other side. Wouldn't it grow a deeper division between us, the not interacting, not knowing the other side? Or do you think it actually was it was not a factor or a back factor? And let me just show you the next one. And she's giving an example of in Mozambique. We have mixed schools, of course, and we have different races. And she's pointing out the beauty of the interaction between children of all races and all colors in the same school.
Yeah. Ideally, if integration would have occurred how it was supposed to occur, then that would be ideally what's happening there. But what's happening here now with the charter schools, with the private schools, that's part of the problem. That's why the racism is the way that it is, because individuals don't have the opportunities to live in the same neighborhoods. They don't have the opportunity to go to the same school, ride the same buses, work at the same jobs as teenagers and things like that, because so much racial divisiveness has occurred. And it's literally, this side of town is literally still the black side of town, and that side of town is literally still the white side of town, and now this side is the Hispanic part of town. So there's not, from 9 to 5, America is a melting pot. You go, you bottom line for these companies. After 5 p.m., people are back in their own little areas, and that's just it. That's what it is. And it has, the global dollar is here in this country, but the interaction is not so much, specifically in areas more so in the South versus California or New York. But still, in those places, you still have your own little pockets to where it's concentrated in solely one specific ethnic group. Now, my personal opinion is, if we're not going to be able to get along, or if you don't want us in your neighborhoods or in your schools, then if that's the case, then fine. Just give us what it is that we need in order to be able to provide efficient education, jobs, et cetera, for our own people, in which we had at one point in time in a lot of different places, but they were destroyed because, bombs were dropped in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Rosewood was burned. All these different places and businesses were burnt down or looted through by whites in order for us to not necessarily advance. Now, when it comes to our music, when it comes to dance, when it comes to fashion and all those other things, oh yeah, you want to be right there with us. You want to be neck and neck with us, right? Because you eat off of it. You know what I'm saying? A lot of these different record companies and things like that, you start seeing some of these different shows that come out to where individuals are older and they tell you how it really is, how they didn't make any money, but people loved it. People leaked off the culture. We still see that on an abundant scale today. And it's people utilizing our intellectual property, and they're taking it and doing whatever it is that they want without paying homage or even paying fiscal dues to individuals who create these things. And that's the climate in which we're in. And that's really the climate that we've been in for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. I feel you. Educate me on one thing, Frederick, because as I was doing a research about Black History Month, I actually found 2 dates, 2 different months related to Black History Month. I found one information about October and one information about February. Can you give me a clear version on what's a correct version, or if there are 2, which is in which country?
Yeah. So in the United States, it started off as a week, and then it was pushed to 28 days in February. And then in other parts of the world, it's celebrated in October. And so in other areas, and I forgot exactly where, I wrote a post about it the other day because I don't necessarily think.
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah, I don't think about it in other parts of the world because, I'm here in the United States, obviously. Not that I don't care. But yeah, so here in the United States, it's always historically been in February. And then I want to say it's in the UK. And I'll have to look and see. In some Caribbean islands, they utilize the month of October in order to celebrate the significance of Black folks. But you and I know as
definitely.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Definitely, UK, it's October.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So, UK celebrates it in October. Yeah, definitely.
Yes. So the thing is, but we understand that this thing is 365, 24/7. These countries, these continents have been able to gain a sense of economic prowess solely based on people that look like you and I. Period, point blank. And I don't care what shade of darkness you are. Historically, in some way, shape, or form, your ancestors contributed to the economic prowess of these different countries and these different continents. And Mother Africa is just getting ravished through with regards to natural resources. And no one's being able to benefit from it like they should. When you look at Jamaica, the road system, the Asians have come over there and pretty much have forever indebted them with building the road system that's over there. And it's happening in a lot of different places. So we can't, I hate that we have to designate it to a month. And I also hate when brothers and sisters only post about it, talk about it during those months. We have to be intentional and assertive with pushing this to be a year-long thing every year for the rest of our lives, in order for our children and our children's children, our nieces, nephews, et cetera, to be able to continue to be empowered with regards to the people that they're looking at in front of the mirror. So that can become infectious and they can share that for future generations. So that's kind of how in the United States, it was originally a week, and then it got pushed to a month, which is the shortest month of the year, February. And then now, a lot of brothers and sisters are really strong on saying, yo, this is 365. There's a whole lot of stuff we have to uncover. And I'm happy to say that I'm happy to say that a lot of people are taking it upon themselves to start learning more.
That's great. And also, one thing you said in the beginning of our conversation, not bringing out the same names all the time. So each year, it's 3 or 4 names who are repeatedly being mentioned as the only Black heroes in American history. And there's so much more and so much more history and so many more people to learn and to be inspired by.
Yeah.
I want to shift to your work now. You were speaking about your first documentary. How many of them have you produced so far? And I know about the most recent one. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, maybe last month.
Yep.
But tell me a little bit about that part of your work, please.
Yeah, so the first documentary was titled The American South as We Know It. And what I did was I traveled throughout the southern part of the United States for a year and a half, interviewing individuals about their specified experiences during Jim Crow, which was a very tough time. Segregation was fully in place. It was kind of like the apartheid over in South Africa, with a lot of death, a lot of criminal activity amongst Black folks, just a multitude of things that did not allow us to be as advantageous as we could have been. So to sit back and to hear first-hand account from individuals who had those different experiences was absolutely amazing. It was a therapeutic process for some of those individuals to have the ability to talk about something that has stifled them for such a long time, or that had haunted them for a long time. So that's the very first documentary, and I just felt compelled to do that because everyone has a story. And because we still have these people around walking on earth today that lived through Jim Crow, I felt like that was my way of honoring and bringing forth to the masses their experiences, as well as to show how resilient they are. So the other side of the coin, Race, Generations, and Reconciliation, is the follow-up documentary. It's the second documentary, and it was released September the 2nd, 2020. So last month, I've received a lot of great feedback from that film. The individuals that I were able to sit down and talk to had to really discuss intimate details on how race has affected them over a span of generations. So I spent time in the African-American community, the white community, as well as the indigenous Native community, and asked specific questions about how race has affected their lives and how they view race over generations. So they had to go back into their own family history to discuss and to look at these different things. And race is fairly new. It's not something that's been around forever. It's fairly new, and it was utilized as a construct to seek and control, and that's what it has done. So, in two of the people that are in the documentary that I really love, based on the reconciliation standpoint, is a gentleman by the name of Uncle George. And Uncle George is 101 years old. His father was an enslaved individual who died when Uncle George was 12. So Uncle George had 12 years of experiencing stories, feeling that energy of his father who was enslaved. And the individual who also is in the film his name is Bill Sizemore, and he's a white male. And his family had Uncle George's family enslaved. So Bill Sizemore was a journalist for about 30 years here in the United States, and he wrote a book called Uncle George and Me. And what Bill and Uncle George sat down and said what reconciliation looks like for them is proceeds of that book goes towards a scholarship for Uncle George's family. And that's something that they've done. And that's what reconciliation looks like. We need reparations, which is on a global scale. Here in this country, in people that had Black folks enslaved, Africans enslaved, received reparations. So think about this. The people who had you enslaved, your ancestors enslaved, received reparation payments from the United States. How does that happen? It's documented that these people received reparations, right? So from a reconciliation standpoint, because it can be so individualized, that's the way that those two did. So I'm very proud and happy about this body of work. We started filming it 2 years ago, and then look at where we're at right now with regards to race in America.
Where can people find the documentaries?
Yeah, so at on my website, historybeforeus.com. Literally just how it sounds.
Yeah, let me put it here, please.
Yeah, no problem.
History before us. Okay.
Yep. So
you can keep talking.
And then the very first film is on that website as well. You can find that on Amazon.com as well. Amazon Prime. So the video section of Amazon Prime. So that's where you can find the work. You can, of course, follow me at History Before Us on all of the social media platforms. But and we start filming the third film next weekend, and that's a film that's rooted in experiences for the Afro-Indigenous here in the United States of America. So that's going to be another powerful documentary, I hope. And I do this all out of the love for educating folks. I'll take on 2 or 3 jobs to pay for it because it's independent work. I don't want anyone to control the narrative. The narrative has been controlled so long by other folks, and it doesn't give us the opportunity to necessarily function in authenticity like we should. So that's something that I'm very happy for. I'm teaming up with the North Carolina Black Indians as well as Black Cherokee Indians in Oklahoma. So we're all collectively working on this together.
That's really impressive, man. And initially, I have to tell you that I wasn't seeing the connection. Filmmaker that I could see, historian and filmmaker, but the licensed mental therapist, I wasn't connecting those dots. But after our conversation, I see it makes a total sense, because you are listening to people who are suffering from that history.
Yep.
And then you go and you dig deeper to really understand and really go into the why of that is happening. And the filmmaking is your way of telling that, of expressing, of sharing that knowledge, that information you are having access to, and giving that back to the world. So it's part of your mission is to really learn from people, help people, research, investigate, dig deeper, and then to share it again. So it's really beautiful work you are doing, and I'm really inspired by your work, and that's the type of guests we actually want here at Freestyle Talks to learn and to grow and to be inspired by people like you, Fredrick.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Sure, no problem, brother.
Yeah. And to wrap it up, what can history teach us to face these moments we are living with COVID, with a lot of questions on our minds, uncertainty, a racial tension. When you look back, and as you very well said, history always repeats itself. What can history teach us about how to best deal with this situation we are living right now?
Yeah. I think that um, the typical answer would be to not make the same mistakes. Right? We hear that often. But I think that we can utilize history in order to have a deeper stake in humanity, have a deeper understanding in researching and processing why people show up in the world the way that they do, um, why people are agitated, why people are in pain, why people are happy, why people are ambitious. We have to look at things from a historical perspective and see how it's deeply ingrained in individuals for them to make for it to tickle their fancy, for it to say that this gives me life, this gives me energy, to say that this is what motivates me. And it all has to be rooted in the premise of what humanity should look like. I can't be empathetic towards an individual if I don't know what their past is. It's
Mhm.
not necessarily impossible, but I got to have a good comprehensive understanding of who you are and who you represent and who has represented you, whether it was lawfully or not, in order for me to be able to want to be a good human to you. Some people that comes naturally, but for some individuals, they got to work for it. They have to work on that. And for them, unfortunately, they got to know a lot. But the only way that you're going to know a lot is if you look at that specific group and you say, okay, well, this is what truth is for that specific group. And it's not just them complaining. It's not that just them wanting a handout. It's not just them saying these things so they can have people to feel sorry for them. These things are rooted in truth. So my hope is that for individuals to research history, to understand history better, to ask and sit down in front of people and ask these specific questions on about themselves. Oh, I'm sorry, about others, in order for them to get a comprehensive understanding about history and how it can make you a better human being. So that's for me. That's what I hope for people.
And what will be your legacy in this world in 50 years?
Yeah. See, 50 years, I'll be 91. So hopefully, I'm still here. Knocking on wood.
You will be. You will be.
Here, I'm gonna be here. It's just to say that I'm a guy that didn't look at things from a monolithic standpoint as just being a therapist only, and also looking at how you can mix in passion as well as technical skills learned and making something out of it, making something that my kids can look up to, and other kids can look up to and utilize it as a reference point, that even though that there was pain in a lot of these stories, the story of resilience, the story of, of persistence came out of it, and it left a catalog for individuals to refer to. So that's what my hope is.
Good man. Have you ever been to Africa?
I was
Any
supposed to.
African country?
I was supposed to be in Gambia on last month. Um, I have a good friend from Gambia. We had worked on some things from a mental health standpoint to where I could work with some Gambians, the new Gambia, and unfortunately, COVID sidelined that opportunity. But last month, I was supposed to be in Gambia. It would have been my first trip over there. So hopefully next year. But I'm definitely looking forward to it for sure.
Yeah. Maybe include Mozambique in your itinerary as well.
I would love
We
to.
would be really happy to welcome you here.
I would love to, brother. Definitely.
Okay. So let's keep in touch. Okay. And I really encourage people to follow you on History Before Us on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great account. Frederick is sharing a lot of work, a lot of history, a lot of knowledge. So I really encourage people to follow History Before Us, and also the website historybeforeus.com.
Yeah.
And my friends, if you ever need to come back here to share new documentaries, new piece of information, new piece of knowledge, this is your home now. Feel free, let us know, and we will make it happen again, okay?
Thank you, brother. I greatly appreciate it.
And thank you very much, and keep up your work. It's really inspiring, and it it's necessary more than ever before, than people like us, young black male, who are doing positive things, who are trying to give back, who are trying to inspire and to create a legacy for the next generation. So I really encourage you. I know it's not easy all the time,
Yeah,
but keep doing it, because it's definitely worth it, okay?
definitely, brother. I appreciate it. Thank you for the kind words and the invite.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. We keep in touch then.
Thank you. Peace.
Bye-bye. Thank you. So that was our guest for today, Fredrick Murphy from History Before Us. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I did. Uh, I always end up inviting you to check the other talks we have in Portuguese, in English. And so check some of them, share with your friends. It's full of different people, different topics, different moments and inspirations. So I'm sure you can find your perfect guest and your perfect conversation. Next week, we will be talking about love and intimacy, relationships, uh, with a intimacy life coach, and we'll talk about her proposition, which is dare to love. I'm really fascinated about that topic, to know more about her work and how we all can learn and evolve on learning how to love better ourselves and the others. So join us next Friday as we will talk with Nalaya about that. And we'll see you soon. Stay tuned. Subscribe to our Facebook channel, YouTube, and Instagram accounts, and follow us and interact with us. Send us the names of people you'd like to see in our channel. We'll make it happen as soon as we can. And thank you, everybody. I'll see you next week. Bye bye.